I was in Miami or Hialeah on Monday, and when there's a video where you were recognizing Elena Garcia and Dario Fernandez and Tomas Regalado, everybody applauded. They're so excited about your being the Secretary of State. Your homegrown son, and so they're just all excited. The other thing they're excited about is that they have somebody that is going to care about Venezuela and Cuba and Haiti and Nicaragua, all the problems, because you've been so vocal. So I guess, can you just go through sort of one by one and say, look, we know what are our options? Not that you know exactly what you're going to do, and a lot of these decisions will be made by somebody else anyway, but what are, like right now, look at what's going on in Venezuela. The Biden administration's allowed oil to flow. He stole the election, completely violated what Biden told him he would do. Maria Corina Machado probably was only alive because of your hard work making sure that Donald Trump put a tweet out. You look at Cuba now. They just dropped the state-sponsored terrorism, which makes no sense. We've got people like Jose Daniel Ferrer in prison. Kids as young as 14 in prison for peaceful protests. So, give me some of your ideas of what is possible.
Let's take one, but let's start with Haiti, because in many ways it's globally complex, and I think the chairman sort of alluded to this a moment ago. There's a fundamental problem in Haiti, in that there is no legitimacy of authority. And I say this in recognition of the fact that some of the national police forces in Haiti have been extraordinarily brave. Despite being outgunned and outmanned, these guys and gals have stuck at their post and fought back against armed gangs. You know, when the most powerful person in any nation state is nicknamed barbecue, that is not a good thing. And this guy obviously is not named that for good reasons. He's not a cook. These are bad gang elements that are operating within Haiti and have destabilized not just Haiti, but threatened to destabilize the Dominican Republic, not to mention the migratory pressure that it places on the United States, on the Bahamas, and on other places in the region. There is no easy answer. The Kenyans are there, and I can tell you, I think they deserve a lot of credit for being willing to take on that mission. In recent days, missions from various other countries have arrived, El Salvador being among them, to sort of contribute to that effort. I don't think anyone can tell you they have a master plan for how you fix that overnight. I do think it does begin with stability and security. You've got to establish some baseline security, and it's not going to come from a U.S. military intervention. So to the extent that we can encourage foreign partners, and I would include foreign partners in the Western Hemisphere, who should be contributing to this effort, to provide some level of stability and security in Haiti so that you can explore the opportunities to have a transitional government that has legitimacy, that can ultimately lead to the conduct of elections, and then have governing bodies in that country that can bring about a nation state that can begin to build some of the things you need in order for permanency. But it's going to take a long time. And I say this with sadness in my heart. There have been good times, and there have been bad times and worse times in Haiti, but sadly, there's not really been a golden era in Haiti's history, and your heart breaks for these people and for what they've gone through. But you also, as a policymaker in the United States, recognize the implications it's had on our country, it's not just in the migratory pressures it's placed on us, but as I pointed out earlier, the threat it poses on a daily basis to destabilizing the Dominican Republic. You mentioned Nicaragua. It's a very weird situation, for lack of a better term. The Sandinistas earlier, one of the first things they did in the new year is they kicked out every nun in the country. They've gone to war with the Catholic Church, which was the last institution in the country capable of standing up to them. But now they've begun this process of amending their fake constitution to basically create a family dynasty, so that Ortega and his wife will now be co-presidents. There's no democracy that's been completely wiped out. They have literally put plane loads of opposition figures and exported them here to the United States and around the world. They literally arrested anyone who signed up to run for president. They arrested every single, you signed up to run for president, they put you in jail. So it's a big challenge, but our national interest is most challenged. Number one, because of migratory pressure. Number two, because the Nicaraguan regime is allowing people to fly into Nicaragua visa-free from anywhere in the world and then transit to the United States. They have become the point of entry for people from all over the world, because you come in without any visa, they charge you $1,000 or whatever the going rate is today, and from there you get on the migratory route and into the United States. They have been direct contributors to the migratory crisis we face at our southern border. And the third is, the Nicaraguans have basically invited the Russians, to establish a military naval presence in Nicaragua, in our hemisphere. That poses a threat to our national security. That needs to be addressed. Now, Venezuela, sadly, is not governed by government. It's governed by a narco-trafficking organization that has empowered itself of a nation state. And we have seen, I believe, upwards of 7, 8, 9 million Venezuelans have just left the country. More are expected to leave. I was in strong disagreement with the Biden administration because they got played the way that I knew they would get played. They entered into negotiations with Maduro. He agreed to have elections. The elections were completely fake. They leveraged migration against us to get those concessions, and now they have these general licenses where companies like Chevron are actually providing billions of dollars of money into the regime's coffers, and the regime kept none of the promises that they made. So all that needs to be re-explored. Because in Venezuela, you have the Russian presence, you have a very strong Iranian presence. The Iranians, in fact, are exploring, or in fact are beginning to build drone factories for the manufacture of Iranian drones in our own hemisphere. Not to mention the long practice of the Venezuelan regime of providing real but illegitimate passports to operatives for Hezbollah in our own hemisphere. And lastly, and I leave it lastly to Cuba because it's one that's been more enduring, the problem in Cuba basically is that despite being a communist regime and Marxism not working, is that they've decided, and they thought what they would do is that they would create this holding company. It's called Gaesa. It is a company that they own by the Cuban military, and that holding company owns everything that makes money in Cuba. If it makes money in Cuba, they own it, and it generates revenue for them. The Miami Herald just did an expose on Gaesa. And while you have electrical blackouts and you have all these other problems economically in Cuba, Gaesa is sitting on billions of dollars that they've generated for their permanency. In 2017, the Trump administration sanctioned Gaesa. Unfortunately, the Biden administration lifted some of those sanctions and restrictions a couple of years ago, which increased the amount of money they're able to generate through things like manipulating remittances and the like. And then yesterday, the Biden administration announced they were rescinding all of the sanctions on Gaesa, which basically the sanctions were this. You can do business with an independent individual Cuban, but you cannot, it's the regime that doesn't allow it. You cannot do business with anything owned by that government-run entity. And yesterday they lifted the sanctions on them. Now, the new administration is not bound by that decision, but nonetheless, that's what's in place. Ultimately, the reality, the moment of truth is arriving. Cuba is literally collapsing, both generationally in terms of all the young people leaving, but it's also collapsing economically. They are now living on 20 and 21-hour rolling blackout and some days longer because Marxism doesn't work, because they're corrupt, and because they're inept. And they're going to have a choice to make, those that are in charge there. Do they open up to the world? Do they allow the individual Cuban to have control over their economic and political destiny, even though it threatens the security and stability of the regime? Or do they triple down and just say, we'd rather be the owners and controllers of a fourth world country that's falling apart and has lost 10% of its population in the last 2 years? And that's a dynamic that they're facing right now. I hope that they will choose the path of empowering the individual Cuban so that the individual Cuban has the ability to do what the peoples of virtually every other country in the hemisphere have been able to do at least once in the last 60 years, and some more than once, and that is elect their leaders, vote for their leaders. You think about what happened here today. The Cuban people have no idea what it's like to have an authority figure or someone in charge and power, like I am as a U.S. Senator, sitting here having to answer questions from his colleagues, and also having to have people in the back screaming and protesting against you. You can't do that to a Cuban official. You can't question their decisions. The Cuban people have never been able to participate in a political process for almost 70 years now, and they're entitled to that as much as the people of Colombia and Argentina and Paraguay and Peru and virtually every other country in the region has enjoyed.
So let's assume you have this job, you're confirmed, you have the job for 4 years. What would your definition of success be?
With regards to generally?
Your job. You're just...
The alignment of our foreign policy to our national interest has been defined, the security, prosperity of the American people. And that's, and by the way, I would define that as success for the country. What I would define as success for the State Department is not just that alignment, but making the State Department highly relevant again. Sadly, and I think I've shared this with you in some of our meetings with many of my colleagues, what has happened over the last 20 years under multiple administrations is the influence of the State Department has declined at the expense of other agencies and also at the expense of national security councils because it takes so long for the State Department to take action. And so increasingly, you stop getting invited to the meetings, and they stop putting you in charge of things because it takes too long to get a result. So we want the State Department to be relevant again, and it should be, because the State Department has a plethora of talented people who are subject matter experts and who have skills in diplomacy, and it's not being fully utilized because increasingly on issue after issue, we've seen the State Department marginalized because of internal inertia, because of the way the structure works. So we have to be able to we have to be at that table when decisions are being made, and the State Department has to be a source of creative ideas and effective implementation. So I would define making the State Department relevant again in the setting of our foreign policy is critical. And I think that's something that maybe is not as perceived by the general public as it is by those of us who watch it on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Thanks.